course, above these scenes loomed God in the sky vault, whose honor Jesus perceived to be compromised, if not entirely challenged. When reading the story in Mark, the story of the temple being cleansed, one can draw this plausible cultural conclusion from the Mark and Jesus allusions to Isaiah and Jeremiah, who similarly perceived God to be dishonored or shamed by those who turned the house of prayer into a den of robbers. The Hebrew Scriptures report numerous instances where the God of Israel perceived personal dishonor and in true Mediterranean fashion sought vengeance for this disrespect. Leviticus, Deuteronomy, the Psalms, Ezekiel, Micah, and others. Modern readers call this lèse-majesté, a violation of personal honor and a crime of high treason in honor-based cultures. We have to remember the principle that everything human beings know and say about God is based on human experience. And in turn, that human experience is culturally shaped. In other words, all theology is analogy. All analogy is culturally specific. And why? Because all analogy is based on human experience, which is culturally specific. A Bible reader can appreciate, knowing this, why the God described in the Bible is quite Mediterranean in character and not at all transcultural. When God's creatures disobey, they dishonor or shame God. By the way, do we Americans, 21st century people, think of that way? See, we're using all these words like sin, which really in the Bible means shaming God, which is being seen emotionally and based on honor, shame, Mediterranean cultural values. And then we're trying to put them into our understanding, and we're singing, our God is an awesome God, He reigns. But our culture, it doesn't work with our culture. Think about this. Blasphemy, by definition, is dishonoring or shaming God. In a world where shame and honor are the core values, a superior shamed by an inferior is bound to extract satisfaction, sometimes known as revenge or wrath. Hence, the God of Israel has no choice but to curse disobedient creatures. Look at this Anchor Bible translation of Ezekiel 16:42-43. I will send my fury against you, and my rage at you shall subside. I will grow calm and not be vexed anymore, because you did not remember the time of your youth and were not in dread of me in all these matters. See, I am holding you to account for your ways, declares your Lord Yahweh. This understanding of God is shaped by Mediterranean cultural values. All theology is analogy. All analogy is rooted in human experience. This was the experience of Ezekiel and his peers. All human experience is culturally specific. So when we think about Jesus in the temple, or when we think about God on the mountain with Israel and the golden calf, We might think he's venting emotions, such as the Revised Standard Version of the Bible wants to have us believe in its translation/interpretation. But friends, you have to remember that venting emotions is not a strategy for redressing affronts to honor. God and Jesus do not vent their emotions. That's what you think they're doing. When you're reading the Bible, you're reading it wrong. Cultural value suggests that Jesus' experiences in the temple primarily stirred his sensitivity to blatant dishonor, disrespect, where honor was due. Anger in this context is different from anger in our Western 21st century introspective culture. Let's talk about values and the meaning of emotions. I want you all to remember this. A value essentially consists of an idea or concept that is bonded with an emotion or feeling. I'm going to ask you this later on. A cultural value, or a value, essentially consists of an idea or concept that is bonded with an emotion or feeling. Honor and shame are concepts and emotions. Look, all cultures, all human beings experience anxiety. Anxiety is pan-universal. But the way anxiety is experienced by honor-shame cultures is very different than the way it is experienced by introspective guilt cultures like the United States. In the Bible, they don't experience guilt. They're anti-introspective. They experience shame. Shame and guilt are the same thing, says Americans. No, not at all. In cultures in which honor and shame are the core values, what's a value? An idea that's bonded with an emotion. Everyone in that culture is socialized into a range of feelings and emotions that accompany the concept. That includes him, folks. A compliment or word of praise causes one's chest to swell, evokes a smile, engenders positive feelings. To be identified as an honorable person stirs a distinctive feeling recognition as recognized as honor. The experience of felt shame can destroy control over one's sphincters, cause fainting, or stir rage. To perceive that God's abode was being dishonored, disgraced, and disrespected would stir the powerful feeling of positive shame in Jesus. Positive shame is a concern for maintaining the requirements of honor, an utter revulsion for its transgression. Now, is that what you have in your mind when Jesus goes into that temple? One minute everything's fine, we're having a mystical experience going up to the house of God. Suddenly he sees this, and immediately on a dime he feels revolted. Why does he feel revolted? Not exactly what we'd like to imagine. He's angry like an American would be angry. Yes?
I used to wonder why. I couldn't really place it, I couldn't imagine it, but then he's reacting as his father. His reaction is his father's reaction. Would that be?
As he understands his father at that point? How would he understand his father at that point?
But that's what he's been saying all along. You know, whatever I say, it's coming from the Father.
Sure.
Our Father. So it's really, maybe he was totally surprised after how he reacted.
Let me ask you something. Does God really get pissed off or shamed?
I think he does.
He does?
I think he does.
How many people say yes, he does? How many people say, no, not really? These are just analogies that...
Which culture are we talking about? Right, exactly right.
And then we got to look at what culture is inspired. The Bible comes from a certain culture. It's not American. Yes?
So with that in mind, my question is, at this point, because he hasn't gone through the rest yet, it's personal but not personal. And it's depending on the framing, because from the eternal sense, it's personal. But at that point in time, is it personal? But there, in that culture, there is no take.
Personal, you mean God the Son is being offended here.
Right.
For his Father, eternal Father.
Right.
Okay. Let's look at this on multiple levels. God meets us where we're at, and the incarnation is messy. It's messy. What is sin? When human beings develop awareness, it changes how we view things like sin. A high level of awareness sees sin as inauthenticity, as inability to be who I truly am, who we truly are. To choose sleep over being awake, to choose selfishness over working justice and love. Low-level retributive justice awareness. Think of a child. You know, everything is a zero-sum game. She got the remote. I got to get the remote. She took the candy from me. Now I need a candy. That kind of tit for tat, which, by the way, Americans are very good at. Just remember, when somebody rapes somebody or hurts somebody, give them the chair. I'm going to say some things that are a little hurtful here. Okay. Then you'll see the level of awareness we are at very low. Turn them into glass. Nuke them. That kind of thing. Okay? And this guy's a daily communicant. Okay, so level of awareness, not too good. At that level of awareness, that will affect how you view sin. You'll view sin as a kind of crime against God, right? And God has to be seen. Because see, tell me how you think of God. Show me your image of God, and I'll tell you your image of yourself.
Haven't we gone from a wrathful God to a loving God?
Yeah, that's not really. Not really. Not really. We like to say that we have. But show me the actions. And I'll show you that the United States is a very unforgiving place to be.
Oh, yeah.
Extra. So, have we really done that? I don't know if that... See, we talk big because we're very much in our heads. Yes?
You know that game where two people are facing each other and one person has their palms up and the other person has their palms down, and you try to slap them?
Yep.
And sometimes the person with the hand underneath, they just withdraw. They don't hit.
Yes.
And sometimes they hit. And I think there's a game of that as we go through our lives. And sometimes when you're trying to...
Great. That's so true.
Sometimes you get the slap and sometimes you don't.
Awareness increases, sensitivity for the other increases. The psychopath thinks he or she is awake, but they're not awake. They're just more selfish and they're extremely hypercritical, and these are the tendencies of a psychopath. And they take themselves into a little place, they go to a little place, and they sit in judgment over everybody. But the distance actually between a psychopath and a mystic is all too brief. Yes, Evelyn.
I say the church has moved like Jan Field and I do, meaning when I was a child it was always you're going to hell and it was fear. Now I go to church and I do see God as a loving God.
Sure.
So there has been a shift in our...
In Vatican II theology and coming into the United States, and our, yes, generally, at least on the verbal level. But push things, well, we know Hitler's in hell. We do?
We don't know.
How do we know that?
It's come back as that.
How do we know that? And by the way, what is hell?
Right.
So when your awareness goes up, you use the same words, the same doctrines, the same dogmas, but your understanding of these things fits differently. Your theology changes. See, that's the problem with verbal orthodoxy, making verbally orthodox parrots and not aware people. Aware people are sensitive to the other. They don't sit in judgment. They feel, like we talked about with active listening, they put themselves in the other person's shoe as if they were in their shoes without losing the as if. Moving right along. So Jesus' disruptive action in the temple was one of revulsion and disgust caused by the major disrespect that was being done to his patron God. Commentators correctly identify Jesus' action as a prophetic symbolic action, meaning an action that effectively set irrevocably in motion God's will for the here and now. Prophets are not Nostradamus, they're not Edgar Cayce, they're not talking about the future. Peasants have a view of the future that's tomorrow or the next day. So when you hear prophetic, think Dr. Cornel West. Don't think, Nostradamus. Don't think Nostradamus. Think Cornel West. I'm addressing situations for the here and now. Or think Aaron Magruder, the creator of Boondocks. Or think sometimes Stephen Colbert. Jesus acted on behalf of God to put an end to this dishonor once and for always. And in the Synoptic tradition, it cost him his life. Right?
But it wasn't for always. We had popes that were charging for penances.
Those are different situations. Regardless of whether or not the action that resulted, that doesn't mean Jesus gave his life for the here and the now of his situation. And what we believe as Catholic Christians is that here and now of Jesus is eternalized. He's a son that's actually for all people. And so we have to find ways to articulate that in our day, in our here and now. And what do? Well, there's pie in the sky and the Bible's basic instructions before leaving Earth, and it's for us to go up to Disney World forever. That's heaven. Disney World forever. Like Batman forever. Disney World forever. And then we go up there, and it's a vacation that never ends, and there's always new lands to see and monorails to take us there. And it's everything's great. But in reality, Jesus is all about the here and now. Okay? The kingdom of God is within you, right? Okay. So now let's talk about American anger. Oh boy. It's great when it votes, too.
Does that make my day?
Emotionalized or somatized. Actually, that's the one. It's a good movie, too. But no. In the contemporary West, anger is perceived primarily as an internal experience, an emotion that also has bodily expression. The raised and trembling voice, the red face, shaking and quivering limbs, high blood pressure, and the like. Even when the visible physical accompanying effects disappear, invisible physical effects of the abiding emotion still plays havoc. Our blood pressure is raised. Very different in the Middle East. The Middle East is anti-introspective. People there tend to primarily somatize experiences. Primarily somatize, not secondarily like in the West. The Hebrew words translated as anger are illustrative. The key word is nose or nostrils in the plural. Of course, the nose is the organ of respiration, and anger affects both the nose and breathing. Thus, a person described literally in Hebrew as short of nose or short of breath is impatient or angry. In contrast, a person long of nose or long of breath is patient and slow to anger. Exodus 34:6, literal translation, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, long of nose, which we translate slow to anger. Literally, long of nose. By the way, Yahweh, what is the word Yahweh? Where does it come from? It comes from emulating the sounds of respiration. What an interesting thing. You want to come back to the spirit, to the wind, to the breath? Yahweh, Yahweh, merciful and gracious, long of nose. Yes, Dandy.
Doesn't Jesus also talk about dissent or anger or with the grinding of teeth and?
That's again somatized. And also grinding of teeth, being another shame, horrible situation in the muck. Yeah. In anger, the nostrils become distended and breathing is hard. Often the Hebrew literally speaks of a burning nose. Like Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, really is translated, Jacob's nose burned against Rachel. But you can see why they don't translate it that way, because Americans wouldn't understand that. Right? Yeah, it sounds silly. What do you mean his nose burned against Rachel? Is he Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? What's going on? Thought we were talking about Jacob, not Rudolph. Gradually, the burning spreads its heat and red color from the nose to the entire face and affects the eyes, and they water. Another Hebrew word for anger means outpouring, and probably describes the unrestrained stream of words to express one's anger. Yet another Hebrew word means splintering, plausibly describing the actions of a person driven by anger to shatter, smash, and splinter whatever is in his way. Only John's reference to Jesus making a whip of cords in chapter 2, verse 15, suggests that shame, Jesus has an experience of positive shame, and that may be what stirred him to anger of the splintering variety. John's citation of Psalm 69 verse 9 to provide the motive for Jesus' actions gives us further insight. Zeal for your house has consumed me, and the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. The Hebrew word for zeal etymologically means intensively red, describing the color of the face of a person experiencing the emotion of zeal. Clearly, this is an example of how emotions are primarily somatized in the Middle East. So if Jesus was zealous, what did his face look like? Red. How are these meanings learned, acquired, and triggered? Well, Jesus is the Son of God. It comes right from the Father. He's just disguised as a human being. No.
He was raised by Joseph.
Right. Well, and by village men, not too well maybe, and other things, yeah, but he learned it from his society. The advice in Proverbs and Sirach contains meaning-making elements that crop up in daily personal conversations and interactions. Proverbs 22, make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. Such collective wisdom guided day-to-day behavior in ancient Israel and socialized young and old alike into the proper ways of interpreting people and situations and the proper response and proper cultural response from the improper cultural response. Traditions about prayer, fasting, the temple, and the like would be another source through which one learned or emotionalized or somatized behaviors proper to each experience. Psalm 122, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. The pleasure experienced by people living in harmony is compared to oil running down Aaron's beard. These joys seem to be somatized. I'm going to the temple with my entire village, all the men, and as I go up the terrain, right, going up to Jerusalem, up the terrain, even though I'm going south, I'm going up the terrain. The air is changing a little bit. I'm being near the Lord. I'm going to see the face of Yahweh, and I go into a trance state. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of Yahweh. History suggests that the name of the person Herod the Great stirred negative emotions, fear, hatred, distrust, and more. Go to Iraq today, say the name of Saddam Hussein. To some people who knew him, they will literally lose control of their bowels. His torture chambers. Daily discussion would reinforce such responses. Children learned the bodily expression of these feelings from their elders. Jesus would be no exception. Thus does culture set the triggers. And it's the same thing with us Americans. Thus, Jesus' disruptive action in the temple, stage 1 of gospel formation, was a complex response involving a number of elements he had absorbed from his culture. A prophetic symbolic action against a venerated and cherished institution, a feeling of positive shame, and very likely other emotions too, like anger. Let's take a short break.